Welcome to the What Am I podcast, a place that will challenge your perception of reality and make you question your assumptions of yourself. I'm your host, Thiago Sindra. In each episode, a guest will share what we've learned from neuroscience that explains why our mindsets can be so different from one another and why it's so hard to open up our minds for change. But we'll try to make it possible, if you're open for the challenge. Hi, everyone. You probably heard this before.
Laurel, Laurel, Laurel.
Well, if you haven't, no worries. It's never too late to join the weirdness of the internet. In this episode, I talked to Dr. Pascal Wallisch, who's a clinical associate professor in psychology at NYU, and a neuroscientist who studies how and why our differences in perception make us disagree. It's one thing if you hear someone singing and you like their style, but your friend hears the same thing and completely disagrees with your taste in music. It's another thing if you play an audio, but you hear one thing and your friend hears something totally different. Or if both of you look at an image and none of you is colorblind, but you still see one color while your friend sees a different color. That's what happened to The Dress, an image of a dress that took over the internet about 5 years ago, where people would see it as black and blue, others would see it as white and gold, like I did. So back to the sound I played before.
Laurel,
Which word are they saying here?
Laurel.
Well, just so you know, some people hear Laurel, others hear Yanny. Crazy, I know. So I asked Dr. Wallisch, why do people even hear different things in the case of Laurel-Yanny, or see different colors in the case of The Dress? He researched these phenomena and called this principle surf pad. In other words, we talk about why you are right and everyone else is wrong. So if you want to know why they are wrong, stay here. I really enjoyed our conversation and I hope you will too. So let's go. So I'm here with Dr. Pascal Wallisch. Welcome to What Am I?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Thiago.
The first question I actually always like to ask is, why do you study the brain or psychology or perception?
Well, those are actually three different questions. So maybe I start with maybe I start with the brain because that kind of ties the other two together. So the reason people study the brain because it's there. It's obviously there. It's obviously important. The reason I'm mentioning that is because in my neuroscience class that I teach at NYU, we spend most of the class on times, last couple hundred years, when people were obviously studying the brain with obviously inadequate methods, I'm saying? Like they were obviously inadequate, very primitive methods. So my students often ask, why do people even try this, studying the brain when the methods are obviously inadequate? And the answer is because it's so obviously important, we can't not study it. You know what I mean? And the reason that's important is because all your experience, all your behavior, all your anything you do, ultimately, everything you see around you, this call is ultimately a product of someone's brain, yours, somebody else's. So the brain is obviously very, very important, right? And so I studied psychology in Germany, and I went into neuroscience because of that. So what I mean by that is, so if you define psychology as the science of behavior, individual behavior, and actually I would probably agree with that you would, in individual experience of behavior. When I studied in Germany in the late 1990s, it's fine, but there was a fundamental problem, and that is behavior by itself is always ambiguous. So what I mean by that is, so for instance, I have a paper coming out that looks at people's flexing behavior, self-elevating behavior, like, oh, I'm name dropping, I know this person, that person. But that's ambiguous. Why? Because it's unclear why they do that. Is that because they feel good about themselves and they're like, or they want to show off? Or is that because they feel terrible about themselves and they're insecure and they want to compensate, right? So behavior is always by itself ambiguous. You never know why someone is doing something. Always. And that's probably going to be some kind of theme today, that behavior by itself is always ambiguous. You can't take it at face value. You do not know why someone is doing something. And I realized this in the late 1990s when I was in psychology. I was like, I think I should go into the brain, deeper into the brain, to understand why someone is doing something. So if psychology is about behavior, the brain is about like why the behavior happens. And then perception, my PhD was in perception. It's frankly the most tractable part of the brain because we have complete control over stimulus. So we can completely control the stimulus, say lights or colors or motions or contrast or luminance, anything like that. As a matter of fact, I would say we have 100% control of the stimulus. Like we can precisely control how we stimulate your brain in perception, like the exact color to the nanometer, like 731 nanometers or 525 nanometers of something like that, of wavelength, or the precise, power that we put into the light. So, and this control goes away once you study anything higher up in the brain, So this perceptual processing at the back of your brain is kind of the first way station of this information processing. Later on, that becomes much less controlled because I can't control, say, your upbringing or how your value system or anything like that. Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it
So
does. It does.
so that's the trifecta. I studied brain because the brain tells you why the behavior happens. The behavior is interesting because of psychology, or psychology because of behavior, and perception is the most tractable part of it.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we'll get more into perception later. I'm curious why. Did you ever, when you're talking about studying behavior and wanting to know why people act the way they do, uh, did you start doing that with yourself first, like trying to question why you do certain things the way you do, or did you start with others, and what's the difference there?
That's a good question. I mean, it's hard to reconstruct. It's been over 20 years actually, how I got into this. But I
Mm.
think so. I mean, what I mean by that is so this introspection, like why did you do X or why did you do Y? Um, Both, yeah, of course. I was interested why I do certain things and why other people do certain things, right? And one thing that psychology does show you pretty conclusively is that people don't necessarily know why they do. If you could say, hey, why just ask them why they did it, right? But they don't, as you know, they don't necessarily always know. And
Right.
actually, as a matter of fact, perception is a good example of that. So early on in psychology, in the early 1900s, people did this like structuralist experimental psychology, Wundt, for instance. As a matter of fact, even earlier, like late 19th century, 1880s, for instance, 1890s, where they literally asked people, "Hey, I'm showing you a red apple, and I want you to describe how that is that you're seeing this red apple, and introspectively describe your fundamental sensation." And frankly, that didn't work because that part of the brain, that part of all the perception processing is not accessible to your consciousness. So basically, you don't know. As a matter of fact, let's try this. Hey, Tiago, can you see me?
I can. Yes.
Can you hear me?
I believe so. Yes.
And how did you do that? A miracle happened. You're in California. I'm here in New York. And how is that impossible? So your brain is. I mean, let me just be clear how crazy this is. So my voice box is agitating air molecules at certain
Hmm.
frequencies that are bumping into each other. That goes into your your pinna, collected by the
Yeah.
pinna,
Yeah.
goes in your eardrum. The eardrum engages some bones that are then pulling on the eardrum,
Yeah.
and that is translated with something that's analogous to a Fourier transform, and that's put together back again in your head as like a sound.
Hmm.
That's pretty crazy, right? And that's
Yeah.
just the first step of processing. So bottom line is that this is a miracle, but it's not consciously accessible to you. You do not know how you're doing this. So if I told you, for instance, that your auditory system is doing a Fourier transform of the signal, you're not aware of that. You know what I mean? Or the
Hmm.
the first step of visual processing is some kind of like categorical analysis of the image, where neurons in the earliest stages of processing in the cortex, we want look for oriental lines, horizontal lines, vertical lines. You have no conscious access to that. What you're giving consciously is the final product of some kind of like 30 steps of processing. It takes about a fifth of a second to even generate this image. But you're seeing the end result of a very, very long processing cascade. So,
I could go even.
so go ahead.
I could go even further, right? When you asked, "Do you see me?" I was thinking, well, I actually see a representation of you. I don't see
Very
you
good.
or hear
Yes, you're
you.
right.
But what
Yeah.
if
I
I
was going to say
hear?
so this was yes, very good. This was not a trick question, but you're absolutely
Okay,
right. You actually don't see me. You see something, a pattern of stimulation on your retina that you interpret as me. Yeah, you're right, but it's not
right.
me. It's a trick. It's a
Yeah, and
illusion.
still
Yes,
in my mind, my perception is of you. I hear you
correct,
and see you,
correct. That's very good.
although
Yes,
it's not even in sync, right? You're probably
absolutely.
a few
And there's also
milliseconds behind.
and all of that. So basically, your conscious perception lags reality behind by I don't know 80 milliseconds or so. So this is called postdiction because it's looking backwards. And also, there's all kinds of philosophical issues. Like if you isn't this hang on podcast called "What Am I?" I was like, I don't know. Like there's like 86 billion neurons. We're like a community here. 86 billion neurons are all talking to each other with
Right,
electrochemical impulses. Actually, it's an electrical chemical sandwich, and people have decided to call that collection Pascal, but that's not what I am. I'm not Pascal. People decided to call me Pascal. And it can
mm-hmm.
get in all kinds of philosophical conundrums like that. If you traced every molecule 7 years ago, 10 years ago, every molecule has changed. It's like kind of like Plato's
Right,
axe or Theseus'
yeah.
ship. Is that still me? And if not, so who? So to answer your question, if this is what am I podcast, I don't know, but people call me Pascal, so I'll go with that.
Right. And actually, this is the reason why it's called "What Am I?" and not "Who Am I?" If I ask you, like, "Who are you?" you'll probably say, "I am a professor" or something.
Actually, I wouldn't. I would like. I have no idea. I have no idea. I don't even
Yeah,
know.
doesn't
I
matter.
don't even
You
know
don't know
what I
anything.
am. No, but for real though,
Exactly.
if someone asks that, I usually say I serve as a professor of psychology, data science, neuroscience at NYU, but I'm not that. I'm not that. No, I serve as that. That's my role, but that's not what I am or who I am.
Right. Right. Yeah, it makes sense. When you introspect, how reliable is that to you to understand your own behaviors? Right.
So people rely a lot on introspection. They say, oh, I did this because of that, right? But in the field in psychology, it's called the fundamental attribution error, meaning that you often do not know why you did something. How do we know that? From studies where we ask people at the time why they did something, oh no, before the thing happened, and then they asked them like a year later, and then the story changed. Because basically, it's like you basically telling a story to yourself. It goes deep into the brain, but basically, studies on like split brain patients.
Mm-hmm.
Let me make it
I,
very
I,
very
I would
brief
get to
because
that.
let's make it very brief because it's like a separate issue. But basically, if you split the brain, if you split the corpus callosum, if you cut the corpus callosum for epilepsy surgery, and then you show the right part of the brain, which understands language but can't produce it in most people, not in
Right.
everybody. But give a command, say, open the window. And then you go up and open the window. But then you ask the person, hey, why did you open the window? The speaking part, the left side, will say, oh, it's too hot in here. Or you give a command to the right side of the brain, laugh, and you laugh, ha ha. You ask the person, why do you laugh? You'll say, oh, you're so funny. But that's just a story. So basically, when I'm talking to you, I'm talking to like your PR department that is trying to make sense of you. So basically, the current view of this is that you are observing your own behavior, and from your own behavior, you're inferring why you did it. But that's just an interpretation. You might have more information because you know the backstory and but it's not necessarily true. This might be just a story that your brain is telling yourself to. And by the way, I'm not judging. Whatever gets you through your day, that's fine. But that gets to the point that things that are adaptive are not necessarily true. So just briefly on that point, lots of research shows that people act far more decisively, far more. People are much more confident on average than the evidence would justify, if that makes sense. But if you but it's also clear why. If you sit around forever pondering, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, then somebody else who does not have those qualms will just take action and just, do the thing. And you're in Silicon Valley, so there's a tremendous first mover advantage. So sometimes it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. It's what matters is you move first, right? And if you move first, then you have a tremendous advantage. Of course, this can go wrong, as MySpace found out, but it's crazy that they lost their first mover advantage. That's crazy. And there's lots, as you know, there's lots of business school studies that they basically screwed up every single thing that they could have screwed up to lose against Facebook. Facebook should not have won. But what I'm saying is, in evolution, there's a lot of asymmetry between moving first and moving last, or taking a chance and not taking a chance, which explains much of our emotional and behavioral response to the environment, which is often not justified by the evidence. Let me give you one example, and then we'll move on to other stuff, because I see you do want to do that. But so let's say you walk in the woods, and there might or might not be a tiger behind the tree. You don't really have much evidence. Maybe you hear something purring, or maybe you hear a twig that's being broken, right? So let's talk about the payoff matrix. Let's say you get scared and you run away, versus you're like, yeah, it's probably fine. What's the payoff matrix? If you're wrong about the fact that there's a tiger there, but you nope out of there, as they say, you might be wrong about this, right? But what's the payoff? What's the downs if you're wrong? Not much, right?
Yeah.
A false positive is fine. Thousands of them. Maybe you get scared, but so what, right?
I'll do some exercise. Yeah, I'll just.
So that's not bad.
I can run and.
But what if you're wrong about this? What if there is a tiger, but you missed it?
Right.
Then you're done.
Yeah.
So the payoff matrix is so lopsided that your entire system is biased towards taking decisive action quickly that is not justified by the evidence.
Right. You were talking about the split brain patients.
Yes.
I know you're probably talking about Michael Gazzaniga and his studies. I love. I think what fascinated me the most was exactly this study of showing you have to stand up, right, and then the left side of the brain trying to interpret that, and he calls it, I think, interpreter, right, and then the guy just said, I felt like getting a Coke or something,
right,
and we're always interpreting that because we need to come up with the story. Right?
Correct. You're interpreting, you're observing and interpreting your own behavior to then come up with a consistent story that makes you be able to live with yourself. So to be clear, the evolution of the brain delivers quick action, which is important. It does not necessarily deliver truth. Okay, we had to invent a scientific method, which is relatively recent in human affairs, like 500 years maybe. To create an engine that is striving for truth.
Right.
Everything else in human affairs is not doing it. It goes against all the human grain to do that. For instance, if you strive for truth, you have to be falsifying. You have to try to falsify your own preconceptions, right?
Right.
All other human affairs are built on running on confirmation bias. Religion, business, politics, that's all runs on confirmation bias. You think you're already right, and you're just looking for evidence that you're right. And by the way, I'm not knocking this, because that sustains this decisive action. If you were just sitting around questioning yourself, you would never get anything done. It's in some shows. I'm not sure if you watched A Good Place. Chidi Anagonye. That's the whole gimmick. That there's this character who can never make a decision because he's always questioning himself. So he's a philosopher. He's a moral. Yeah, he's a philosopher. Yes. So they're lampooning that. But they're right. If you're always like, hey, what am I wrong about this? You're never going to get anything done. And now, of course, that is the scientific method. You start with a hypothesis, but you're trying to test the hypothesis, meaning you're trying to falsify it. As far as I know, that is relatively unique in human affairs, because everything else is geared towards this confirmation bias, which, by the way, I don't really think confirmation bias is bias. It's necessary to bring about this action. So from an evolutionary perspective, this whole being right is not the issue. It's taking decisive action. Let's say let me give an example. Let's say you and I, we're foraging. We're foraging for food in the evolutionary environment. You sit down and think about, where the best food source is. You're just thinking about that all day because you don't have enough evidence. I don't think at all. I just explore by trial and error and see if there is food or not. By the time you have figured it out, I've already collected it all. So there's no food left for
Right.
me.
Yeah.
So there's virtue in being first and acting decisively.
I may
So
starve thinking.
yeah, so if you study this if you study this in the lab, you're like, oh no, people suffer confirmation bias. They're doing it wrong. Like, no, you're in the lab. You don't live in the real world. You're literally in the ivory tower. In the real world, you have to take decisive action fast. That's what matters.
Hmm.
That's what. And your ancestors who didn't do that, they were all eaten or starved. So you're biased towards that. But what's wrong with that? So it's
Hmm.
not a bias. So there's a lot of shows. They're like the whole college industry in psychology. Look at biases. I'm like, no, you misunderstand the problem. You have no idea what you're even talking about. It's a bias if you don't understand what the system is optimized for. But if you study the system in the environment it's built for, it's doing exactly it's performing exactly as designed.
Right. Especially like we're not made, let's say, for objectivity, right?
No, we're not. We're not. We're
We
not.
survive by subjectivity, and then
100%.
if you do introspection, you actually only caring about subjectivity as well. But
That's
when
right.
you do scientific research, you're
Yes.
actually caring about the objectivity, like the truth, let's say the factual truth,
Yes.
versus when you want to survive, you have your personal
Correct.
subjective truth. But is it fair to say that uh, studying these things, studying objectivity, let's say doing scientific research, is
Well,
more for the society, while introspection is only for the person?
let me try to be fair. Let me try to be fair.
Yeah. Okay.
So first of all, again, this scientific method is relatively recent, 500 years at most, less if you wait until it's stabilized into like a set of this scientific method. But to be clear, people are implementing scientific methods, so lots of researchers fall short of this ideal. If that makes sense. So they're like, oh, if they go into a certain field, they might have an axe to grind. They want to show something, and you see this a lot. You're like, so why is someone studying something? Oh, because they want to show something is the case. Say someone is NYU, for instance, just started a center for psychedelic research, and there's nothing wrong with that. That was long overdue that, we do psychedelic research. There was a pause for legal reasons for 50 years. So this is long overdue. But many of those people want to show, I don't know, it helps with depression or whatever. Like, so every time you have an agenda, basically, you might compromise your. And I don't want to single out the psychedelic people. There's nothing wrong with them. I'm just saying that this is actually very typical that a scientist is attracted to something because they want to show something. So I study music, for instance, and some people who are joining my lab, they're like, "Oh, I want to show that this kind of music is the best music objectively." I'm like, that's not how it works.
Right.
So we have to be very careful. But it is fair to say that most people who are not using the scientific method, they are not. So the scientific method strives for this intersubjective truths, right? So I don't take your word for it, but you have to, give me evidence to believe something, or I want to test my beliefs with evidence. The problem with the other one, with the just introspection and interpreting your own experience, I have a question for you, Thiago. If you are reasoning about the world based on your life experience, that is fine as long as the following is the case.
Hmm.
Is your life experience representative of everybody's life experience?
Oh no,
Oh
I
no.
did this before. Yeah, I thought it was
Hang on, hang
eventually.
on, hang on, hang on. You just said, "Oh no." Well, the good news is at least you're not delusional. But yes, if you know that your life experience is not representative, why would you think you can distill general truths from your life experience? Does that make sense? So,
Right.
so if your life experience was representative, you could do that, but you can't because it's not. So,
Yeah,
science
I
is
used to
exactly
think it was.
same. But then you grew up. The point is that the point is that science is a systematic way, or scientific method is a systematic way of doing what people are doing anyway, trying to understand the world, but accounting for these biases and accounting for the fact that the individual experience is not going to be representative. But that's it. It's just formalizing what people do anyway, but it is prioritizing truth over anything else. And the problem is in everyday life, a lot of people say they want the truth, but a lot of people can't handle the truth. They just want to fit in. They're just going to get through the day. You know, they want to have a tribe.
Yeah.
And frankly, there's nothing wrong with that. Let me ask you, would you rather be right if everyone else is wrong, or would you rather be, wrong with everybody else? What's healthier?
Wrong with everybody else. Well,
No, you're right.
instinctively, I would think
No,
this.
no, you're right. You're absolutely right. So what I mean by that is, how do I say this? Historically, if you were right when everyone else was wrong, say Galileo or something like that, you could get killed, or at least ostracized. And as you know,
Yeah.
with the whole cancel culture, that hasn't changed much. People don't kill you anymore; they just take your job. But if you're wrong with everybody else, say you are, I don't know, making reckless bets in the housing market in 2008, 2007, well, they can't like just destroy the economy. You're gonna get a bailout, Same
Hmm.
is true for my classes, right? If I teach, right, and everybody fails the class, do the students have a problem? Or if everybody fails the class, do I have a problem? Yeah, if everybody fails the class, I have a problem, right? Because then the problem is obviously me. So it's much better to be wrong with everybody else. And so frankly, I believe, and I don't want to get too much into this. Most people don't really make decisions like that. They just do what everyone else is doing. There's a lot of research on that. Many people do not, what you want to call it, make these decisions in a vacuum. They do tremendously consider what other people are doing. That's how you get fads, crypto,
Yeah.
GameStop,
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to continue in this topic. Like, I honestly can talk about this
And I was going to say
forever.
that's a whole different. It's a whole different conversation.
Yeah. No, but it's how we started talking about perception in a way, and how
Yeah.
behavior was important, and just
And to summarize that, yes, your perception is not delivering objective truth to you, but it's not supposed to. It's supposed
right.
to make you act quickly so you can survive. Look, since you asked why are you here, there's two reasons biologically to survive long enough to pass on your genetic information to the next generation. That's very sobering, and I'm not necessarily believe that's all there is, because people, as you said, have this people are this nexus between the animalistic and the divine.
Hmm.
And I don't want to discount the divine seed that's in you and all that. But from a biological perspective, what matters is that you survive long enough to pass on your genetic information to make a replicate of you, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And anything that aids in that will be more represented in the gene pool, the next generation, and everything that doesn't will be less. It's been going on for 1 billion years, so 1 billion years of development time. And by the way, you might be hard to believe, but you're the final link, the final chain, the final step in an unbroken chain going back 1 billion years. Like if we made a movie of how you came to be a crazy movie of organisms just reproducing just before they die and crazy coincidences, and here you are. How crazy is that? Right.
Well, am I really here? I'm may just be a video, an AI talking to you. You don't
Yeah,
know, right?
you could be. I mean, it could be this all could be a simulation. You're just a hologram, and who knows? Yes, it's possible.
Who knows? Moving on to one of the reasons actually I found you, and I know you were in the You're Not So Smart podcast with David McCraney as
And
well, and then
by the way, on that note, I told him,
hmm,
yo, you should rename your podcast. Like I would call it you're smart. You're probably smarter than you think,
right.
because of what I just said. Like by some unattainable ivory tower standard in academia, like, oh, we're going to put you in a lab and putting up these crazy standards. Yeah, you're irrational, totally. But you're not giving the system credit for what it's trying to do. So
Yeah.
I would call the podcast "Speak for Yourself, comma You're much smarter than you think."
It's a bit long, but yeah, maybe
Right.
maybe he should
And
consider that.
by the way, I'm not talking trash about him. I told him this to his face.
I know. I imagine that.
Right.
So anyway, the reason for that is because you're very well known in the study of the dress and the sneaker, the Laurel-Yanny, and then you
Yes.
have your own Crocs and socks
Yes, that's all true.
going on as well.
All of those things are true. That sounds unlikely, but it's all true.
Right. So I guess like my first question on that would be why the dress and Laurel-Yanny? Why did you decide to focus on those?
All right, so I have to take a step back. So 10 years ago, as you said, I was doing I was working on perception, and I've always been interested in like how the same stimulus, the same image can look different to different people, right? Like for instance, I'm not sure if you want to show this. I'm not sure how your podcast is delivered, but basically, people might be familiar with the duck rabbit. You know, where you see a duck or a rabbit.
Hmm.
That's been known for over 100 years. Things like that. You know, are things this way or that way? Visual illusions like that. So I was always interested in that. How does the brain do that? And we looked at that algorithmically, like literally, how do neurons interpret ambiguous motion as going left or right or up and down? So that was motion, right? And frankly, I didn't think too much about color vision because in color perception there had been no such illusion that is ambiguous. There had not been. All right, unless you're like colorblind or something like that. But other than
Right.
that was not a thing. So, and it seemed to be the case in 2012. You've asked me that we have more or less worked out the color vision in some detail. What I mean by that is if I make a certain light on my computer, I can predict what you're going to say this color is. So on that level, like I make the
Hmm.
color in my basement or the light, and I predict what your perception will be. We figure this out. I can put together a light. I can predict you how you will see it. All right, that was the background. And if you had told me in early 2015 that Pascal, you're going to have papers on dress perception and color perception, and you will talk a lot about dresses, and it's going to be your most cited paper, I would have told
And
you, you know what,
shoes.
shoes, yes, all that. I would like, no way, that's not likely, okay. But then what happened was on February 26th, 2015, the dress phenomenon broke. So a little recap to your viewers. Earlier in 2015, Cecilia Bleasdale had taken a picture on her Samsung Galaxy cell phone in a shop in England, a picture of a dress for the wedding of her daughter. All right. But she had overexposed the dress with a flash, so the colors were washed out. So the
Right.
dress in reality is actually black and blue. But the image of the dress, which was leaked to BuzzFeed, is ambiguous. Some people see it as white and gold, and other people see it as black and blue. The reason for that is ultimately, and this, you tell me when I should stop, because this is going to go into inside baseball color vision.
Right.
But I can explain it if you want to know. If you actually want to know, I can explain it. But it's a little bit inside baseball color vision.
Okay. We can
Or do you
let's
want to
say just
just
summarize what happens.
okay?
I actually want
So,
to go to Laurel-Yanny as well.
yeah, so let me summarize. This is so what we show in this paper, and the same is true for Laurel-Yanny and all of these, is that experience impacts perception. All right. So I'm going to abstract. I'm going to abstract why it's ambiguous. If people want to know, it's because of the lighting is ambiguous. So people infer different lightings based on their experience. And what creates the experience in the case of the dress is some people get up early in the morning, and other people are night owls, which exposes them to different levels of light, which bias their perception one way or the other. Again, this sounds very unlikely, and I probably wouldn't believe it myself if we didn't show that with 13,000 people, more than 13,000 actually. So this actually checks out. And the people who are night owls do assume artificial light, which is on average long wavelength, which will make you think that the lighting is artificial, which will make you see the dress as black and blue. Whereas people who are getting in morning will assume daylight, which is more short wavelength, which will bias the perception towards white and gold. If you actually want to understand this, read the paper. But the big philosophical upshot is your experience literally colors your perception. But here's what's important. It doesn't tell you that. To you, you just see it the way you see it.
Yeah.
But what's going on inside of it is your brain is solving a riddle to infer the reflectance of the surface from a ambiguous input, because the wavelengths in the light matter too. So that's what's going on. And the same is true for Laurel-Yanny. So let me tell you what Laurel-Yanny is. So Laurel-Yanny is something like that, but for sound. So there was this sound clip that was uploaded to dictionary.com. I think it was dictionary.com.
Vocabulary.com, I think.
Yeah, one of those. Either vocabulary.com or dictionary, one of those. And
Right.
and there, a high school student in 2018 clicked on sounding it out, and the word was laurel, but the sound was in their mind Yanny. So they're like, that can't be right. so they uploaded it, and we actually figured out, and I'd be happy to send you the backstory. So I actually did an investigation with BuzzFeed, if you can believe it. We tracked this down. What happened? What happened was that the unemployed cast of cats was tasked with recording all of these words, because they are trained voice actors and they can read the International Phonetic Alphabet, the IPA.
Mm-hmm.
So they were reading all of those 500,000 words or more. As it so happens, recording one of them, the most plausible thing is that while they were recording this in their New York apartment, a truck went by outside and was braking just so during the upload that a critical piece of the audio information was lost, which again made it ambiguous, which is then resolved from experience. And the experience is stuff like how much rock music have you listened to, which bias you towards lower frequencies, or how much high frequency has you heard in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, same thing throughout. Your experience biases your perception, and I find that fascinating, because here's why. Because different people have different experiences, so the different perception comes from the different experience, because you don't share the experience.
And it's hard for you to understand that the other person is actually perceiving something totally different, right?
So here's the thing. So in 2020, right? How would you know how someone else sees this, right? So to you, it is what it is. So if someone else sees something else, the first instinct for most people is to say, look, I know I'm right. I know I'm seeing this right. Maybe you should see the eye doctor or the ear doctor or stuff like that, right? And that's a fair presumption, right?
Right.
I mean, the reason you trust your perception is because, for the most part, it's getting you through life. Just let me ask you this, Tiago: are you driving cars?
No, I do drive cars.
But okay, how much and how is that working out? Like, do you have a lot of accidents?
No.
So for the most part, your perception is working really well, right?
Yes.
People trust their perception because in every life, accidents are rare.
Right.
So if it was so unreliable, how do you explain people are fine for the most part? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the answer is, in everyday life, you have like these multi-redundant streams. So as you probably know, they had to add sound to electric vehicles because people were getting run over because they couldn't see them. But in these laboratory situations, or in these very special cases where you have just the dress, image, not the dress, the image of the dress, or this voice recording of Laurel-Yanny, you can deliberately create situations that are on purpose ambiguous. And that, Tiago, is what we did with the Crocs and socks. So in the Crocs and socks, here's what we did. Let me just walk you through it briefly. In the Crocs and socks, we took a pink Croc, put it on a black background, so there's no other cues, and shone green light on it so that it will actually look gray to you. So if you ask people, hey, are these Crocs, what color are these Crocs? If you take that at face value, it will look gray. If you took an image of this and did Photoshop pixel mapper, it would be a gray pixel. However, here's the key. This is amazing to me. If we add white socks and also shine green light on it, they will look greenish. Now, some people, not all people, some people use that cue from the green socks to infer that the light was off, the light was green, and then can recover the original color of the Croc as pink, even though it actually is gray.
Right. But by removing the green from the Crocs and then actually seeing
mentally. But you're not aware you're doing that. So the people we asked, I just see it pink. What are you talking about? It's pink. But they're not aware of what they're doing. But that's, again, conditioned on your beliefs about socks. So we asked people, the same people, hey, how strong is your belief that socks like that are white. If your belief is very strong, like my belief, like when I was growing up, socks like that were just white. There was no other kind. Then you are able to do this. Oh yeah, the fact that they look green but they are white allows me to infer what the light is. Great, so I can subtract the light from the whole image. But if you're like a millennial or Gen Z, you're like, oh, the socks could be any color, pastel colors. I'm going to eat the socks, whatever.
There's
Then
no socks. Like, why?
yeah,
Why
whatever.
socks?
Exactly. Yes, yeah. So you have no strong prior belief what color socks should be. Then why would you override what you see at face value, what they appear to be? So they don't. And
Yeah.
again, if I didn't do this research myself, I probably wouldn't believe it. But the data is very strong. There's thousands of people involved. It's very multicultural. It's a surprisingly robust result.
So I can predict that you see the dress as black and blue, right?
Because I'm a night owl.
Exactly,
However,
right. Because every time I talk to you at 3, 4 a.m., you're
yeah,
still like awake. Oh my God.
However, there's a catch. There's a catch, Tiago. I want to be very clear about this. This night owl stuff has nothing to do with sleep per se, or night owl per se is chronotype. It has to do with light exposure. So we're just using the
Yeah.
chronotype as a proxy for light exposure. Let me tell you why that matters. So in any individual case, that is actually not a good predictor, because let's say I am a night owl, but this system, Tiago, forces me to get up in the morning to teach in the morning. Or let's say I'm a night owl, but I don't have incandescent lights. Say I have tungsten lights, which have a different, or neon lights, which is different spectrum. So that wouldn't work. But on average, yes, absolutely.
Right.
And frankly, that is how I see the dress now. I see it as black and blue now. Initially, I started by gold for reasons that are complicated. But go ahead.
And by the way, the Samsung Galaxy has improved a lot. So I wonder, like, what would happen if that hadn't happened back then, but now where like when the cameras are much better, and then like it's not like overexposed and everything. Like, so we were kind of lucky that
Yes.
happened with that
Right.
exposure, that
That's
quality.
right. That's right. So I'm actually not surprised it happened then, because it happened at a time when cell phones were like smartphones were still relatively new. In 2015, smartphones were still less than 10 years old, if you count the iPhone as the first smartphone. But there was now social media like Instagram and BuzzFeed and stuff like that. So I'm not terribly surprised that that's when it happened. You know what I'm saying? It would make sense. You have the ability to take an image like that, and if you have like billions of people taking pictures randomly, you will eventually get one like that, and that would be amplified by social media. Because if you did this 10 years earlier, you would tell your friend, "Oh, that's odd. Like, I see it this way. You see this way. Maybe you should go to the doctor." That's when it ends. But now you can put it online.
Yeah, and I remember talking to. It's been a few weeks. I talked to a guy from. Actually, he's from New York as well, and we were talking about the podcast, and he couldn't believe that when I was saying that we may see different things, like different colors, different like have totally different percepts. Like, he was like, no, I can't understand this. Like, we see the same thing, right? We
No, you
just
don't.
interpret differently. I said, no, we actually don't.
That's right.
And it was hard for him to actually understand that we actually see things differently. Not only
So there's research on this suggesting that 95% of the people, if you pick them at random on the street, are what's called naive realists. So basically, they think they see they see the world as it is. That is obviously not true. And I'll give you a thought experiment for that. I'm sure you've heard about this question, like, if a tree falls in the forest, it doesn't make a sound.
Yep.
And we now know what the answer to that is. The answer is, if there's nobody to listen to it, it will create a pressure wave in the air, but does not create a sound. And here's how you know that's true. What sound is created is depending on the auditory system of the organism that's present. Let me give you an example. Imagine a elephant, a moth, a person, and a spider were all there when a tree is falling, and they could all talk to each other. Let's just say that the elephant would say, "Well, I heard a very low rumbling sound," because elephants have like infrasound, and they go way down, like below. 20 hertz or below, right? The moth would be like, "No, I heard a very high pitched tone," because the only thing that the moth hears are these like high pitched end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
The person will probably hear a tree falling, so all of these frequencies with a peak at around 1,000 hertz, and the spider will be like, I didn't hear anything, because the spider doesn't
but
have ears.
but I ask back to you,
Right.
how can we be sure that they're actually hearing, understanding the same perception that we have as hearing, like we understand the sound in a different way? That what if, for example, if I'm deaf, I, depending on the sound, the vibration of the air molecules, I can still feel
No,
that vibration
Tiago,
on my body, right?
Tiago,
How can
Tiago.
we know that the elephant or the moth can actually hear sounds and not like feel like a shock or something, right?
Yeah, no, you can't. You can't. There's this notorious paper by a philosopher, Nagel. What is it like to be a bat? And the upshot of the paper is we will never know what it's like to be a bat because we can't imagine having sonar, But I can get a step
Right.
with this research, that my research, I can take a step farther and say, I will never know what it's like to be Tiago, to see the world like Tiago. Here's why. If your experiences matter in the way you experience the world, and only you have your life experience, then the answer is, oh no, only Tiago experiences the world like Tiago. So every mind is a epistemic island.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's actually a miracle we can even talk to each other and understand each
Right.
other.
Yeah. I mean, there is still a lot of things that we have kind of in common that try to we perceive similarly due to the way our brains evolved, right? But
Correct,
still,
correct. So the upshot is this: the biology is shared enough, or the brain is similar enough that for the most things it's close enough. So let's say I say there's a chair over there, and why do I think there's a chair over there? And what's just hallucinating is because you agree with me. You also see it. You
hmm
know, if only I see the chair and you don't, now we can't both be right. Like now we have to talk. But
right,
for most perceptions, the agreement is close enough that there's two things that are clear. There is an external reality out there that we are inhabiting together that is kind of independent of us, and we're interpreting it similarly because our biology is close enough. But in these
right.
edge cases where experience really matters, because there's a lot of, by the way, people rely more on this experience to fill in the blanks if there's information missing. So the more information is missing, the more this experience matters, because you fill in from the experience. What I'm saying? It's called a Bayesian prior, Bayesian inference. I don't, want to go too deep into that, but it's pretty
Hmm.
well established that the more uncertainty there is, the more ambiguity, the more information is missing, the more you're leaning on your prior experience. But because the prior experience is different in different people, then this disagreement arises, which is what we call surfpad. So substantial
Right.
uncertainty together with ramified or forked priors will yield
Disagreement.
disagreement. Yes.
Right. I want to get there.
Yes.
Especially the name surfbed.
Yes.
But before that, the study, the paper you wrote that is called, hold on, let me find it here. Immediate ambiguity resolution in speech perception based on prior acoustic experience, right?
Correct. That's a Laurel-Yanny
Uh,
paper.
yes,
So briefly, we played a couple thousand people these sounds, these clips. Yes. So this clip and then some modified versions where we make it higher pitched or lower pitched, filtering, digital filtering. And yes, when we asked them about their priors, yes, that's a study. Playing the clip to people and linking it to their priors.
right. I like how you explain how you eliminated the frequencies and see that seemed to be the strongest correlation there is
Yes.
eliminating certain frequencies and then
Yes.
some people.
The upshot is this: if we digitally filter the stimulus, we can strongly shift the percept, right? So someone
Right,
who has not heard Yanny before, we can make that person hear Yanny if we just cut off the lower frequencies, and vice versa. And
right,
everything else works like that. So if you listen to the sound on a headphones versus speakers, because headphones versus speaker emphasize different frequency ranges, you get the same effect. And we argue that your experience acts in the same way, that it colors your perception just like another filter. And frankly, age also works like that, because what you call it, older people like me, literally the higher range of my inner ear, the hair cells have died. So the hair cells in the inner ear are dying, Tiago. Uh,
I
uh,
know. I know.
frequency dependent. It starts early on with the 20,000 hertz range and it goes lower. The bottom line is the older you are, the more you're going to overemphasize the lower frequencies, which makes you more likely to hear Laurel. Anyway, so my point is this is all consistent. Filtering
Right.
physically, digitally, biologically, and also then by experience all has the same effect.
Okay. And for what it's worth, I see white and gold in the dress, and I hear Laurel. Okay. And
That's amazing. And by the way, that's also the most common. Those two are the most common percepts.
right. It was funny because yesterday I showed my wife the Laurel-Yanny. I think she never heard of this before, and then like
Well,
she listened to it, and then okay, what am I listening to? I was like, what do you hear? I didn't give the options, right? And she
so
said,
what she say?
Laurel, of course. And I
Okay.
said, and she asked me why. Why is this like difficult? I said no, because some people hear Yanny. She's like, no way, really.
Oh yes.
So
It's actually very very creepy. So I also first heard Laurel, and at some point you can hear Yanny, and you're like, oh my god, the Yanny was there all along. It's very scary, very creepy.
right. Yeah, I think I'll have to play with the high frequencies there to
Yes.
in order to listen to hear Yanny. Like for
Yeah,
me,
but
I have
once you hear it, it's very scary. It's like Yanny, Yanny. It's like very very high pitched.
I
It's
can't.
very high.
I
It's
can't.
so. But it's what's creepy is because I know I've heard it as Laurel before. You realize the Yanny was there all along, lurking in the shadows. It's very scary. You'll see.
Okay. When you were talking before about the filling in the blanks, and one thing I noticed when I was reading the paper there
Uh-huh.
is that for us, I mean, I mentioned before, English is not my native language. It's not yours as well. So when we
Same, yeah.
right, so when we're learning a new language, like in the case of English,
Yes.
I remember in the beginning, like when I hear people talk and they and I only let's say I know I don't know any word at all. Like I don't know
Right.
English, I don't know vocabulary, anything. I don't have anything.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
then I hear the sounds only, right? I just hear
Right.
like blah 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 blah.
Right.
These sounds, I'm usually relating those sounds to a certain context, right? And
Yes.
like I assume this is also how we learn as a baby, etc.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So
That's right.
after a while, all these sounds in the context, like they start forming words, but I
Yes.
still don't know all the words. There are
Okay.
words in between.
Let me stop you right there because I have
Okay,
something to say
okay,
about that.
okay,
You are
okay.
you are no just link back what you said earlier, and you're 100% right. Here's the thing. Here's what's really crazy, and I'm not sure what you're working on LinkedIn, but what you just described is the number one problem in like speech perception in AI. Because when you're talking or when I'm talking, you hear these pauses between words, right? Yes, you hear these
Yep.
pauses between words. They are not there. In if you just listen to the audio stream and didn't know the language, and you can try this if you as you said, listen to a language you don't speak, say I don't know, Chinese or Italian or something like that. It's just one unbroken stream of
Hmm.
sounds
Right.
and frequencies, and if you have to parse that, that is amazingly hard, and you're putting in like these periods or these pauses, these breaks between the words comes from your brain. If any AI researchers are listening to this, they will be able to confirm this is called the parsing problem, and it's the hardest problem in like speech perception because you have to put that in from your experience. Now, here's however what aids in that, and that is, as you just said, you can make out some words and others can fill in. Language has a property that most people don't fully appreciate, which makes learning this easier, and that is it's Zipfian, ZIPF, Zipf's law, meaning in any given corpus of text, say our podcast here, this hour that we did, 50% of the words we used will be made up by 100 words. Okay, the other 50% will be made up of words that are only used once. So what's cool about this is if from an AI perspective, like I said, I don't know what you're working on, but let's say you work on neural
Not AI.
networks. or machine learning, you know that this repetition of the same pattern of information is very powerful. You can learn patterns very quickly like that. And then the ones you don't know, you can infer from the ones you do. So do you see how language aids in learning? Because 100 patterns are repeated all the time, and the ones that are not are in the context of the ones that you don't know. So you actually, if you're good at this, you can pick up languages like that. And so language has a property being Zipfian, ZIPF, which makes it easy to learn.
Right, and that's where I was going to.
Right.
After I know certain languages, I mean certain words, if I don't know words in between, I'll just associate those sounds, and not consciously, like just
Yes, of course.
unconsciously, and then I
Unconscious
simply
inference.
know that. What?
Unconscious inference. Unconscious inference. That's what it's called.
Unconscious inference. Yes.
Yeah.
I know it's hard, like to do research, to do a study where when you're recruiting participants or like you're doing the survey, you don't know exactly what all the priors were, right? You
That's
have
right.
to make a list and then just use that list. But what if, for example, I had an accident, a car accident, or for example, because I know there was one question there you asked if the person is a musician or not. In my case,
Yes,
I'm
yes.
a musician, so I
Okay, great.
played drums for a while and bass as well. And whenever I did that, I used this type of headphone, like
Uh-huh,
this
uh-huh.
big one. And in order to hear the room, I would move the right ear, the headphone out of the right ear, so I can only listen to the
Uh-huh.
monitor, like to the audio on my left ear, and
Uh-huh,
listen
uh-huh.
to the room on the right ear. But
Right.
because of that, I raised the volume a lot, and
Sure.
with time, now I don't have the same frequencies. I cannot hear the high frequencies on the left ear because of that. Like
That,
I literally have a problem with that. So how do you
I'm
know
sorry.
even these things?
First of all, I'm sorry to hear that. Second of all,
What? I'm sorry. What?
I'm sorry to hear you. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so my point is, you're funny, but the point is that that is precisely why we need thousands of people. So statistically, if you
Mhm.
sample randomly, these idiosyncrasies will like average out. I'm actually amazed that given all this noise, this variability, the result is so stable. However, you make a good point. So a follow-up study, although we have not done this yet, a good follow-up would be something like this: either in the dress or in the Laurel-Yanny or any of the others. You get people who are able to hear or see both based on their daily form, and then experimentally you expose them to one experience more for a while. So maybe either you play loud, low frequency music or something like that, or high frequency music to another group, or you expose them to long wavelength light or short wave light, like different light bulbs. And my prediction is, I'm pretty sure this is going to work. That is going to then bias these people to make them lock into one perception.
Mhm.
But
But
that's not been done yet. So what we do so far is so that's one strategy. Take a small number of people, I don't know, 20 people, right, and put them in this box and expose them to this experience for a while. We don't, by the way, we don't know how long, which is why I haven't done this yet, and then see what happens. Or you do what we did, which is you have this large list of potential things that could matter,
right.
large list of people, like thousands, and then pray that the laws of statistics apply, which mean, central limit theorem, law of large numbers, that this will work out. That
Yeah.
these relationships that's basically that the random variability will cancel out, and the systematic variability will emerge or restrain it.
Yeah, it makes total sense. One thing I'm curious about is when you said Yanny was there all along, right?
It was, yeah.
So Yanny was never there. Originally, it was only Laurel, right? And then
Well,
someone heard Yanny, and then after that, people only hear Yanny. My
something like that.
question would be, what would happen if we, instead of giving two options, we had given three options? Like there's
Mhm,
Laurel, Yanny, and this third one.
mhm,
My
mhm.
question is, do you hear Yanny because there was an option Yanny, and then you try to hear and then you cannot unhear because now there is a high frequency you hear? But what if you had a third option?
No, I'll tell you why. So first of all, so auditory perception is surprisingly categorical. These an analog gradual frequencies are mapped onto the very discrete phonemes. It's kind of like a machine learning thing. It's actually quite amazing. You have a continuous analog input stream and you discretize it in your brain. unconsciously. So because of that, I would say no. But in the dress, someone did that. In the dress, someone didn't give any labels, verbal labels. They just asked him, "Hey, pick out of this giant color palette the
Right.
what you see," without telling them what it
Mm-hmm.
is. They made sure they found people who are naive to this, like who had not seen this before. This was like years ago. And what you can show is no, there is clusters. So it's not random at all. Like people pick these two clusters, like black and blue and white and gold.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a gradient. It's not a gradient.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
ti- it's not tied to labels at all. It's like if you ask people to pick unlabeled pa- color swatches or patches, they will do that.
Right. Yeah, I say that because I would be very surprised if when I asked my wife, "What do you hear?" without her knowing the options, and she said Yanny, I would be like, "Pff," because
But that's what happens.
I know,
So what about
I know, I just didn't
what, I-
experience that in person. So
no, what I mean by that is some of my students, I don't give the option, is this Laurel-Yanny? I just ask them, what do you hear? And they just say what they hear, and it's like, yeah, it's obviously Yanny. I know this is mind blowing. That's what. By the way, you asked me earlier, and I didn't really answer this. Why did you say this? Because it's so mind blowing that someone else lives in the same reality, but they experience it so differently,
hmm
right? And
hmm
and as far as I can tell, they're not trolling me. I mean, I have to dress on my office door before the coronavirus. There was like people walking by, and they would just get into these vicious arguments with each other because it's right on my door. I have a printout of the dress on my door, the image of my office door, and I think for some reason it's even more compelling to people if it's not on a screen, but it's really right there. You look at the same image, it's right there, and sometimes people don't know the backstory. So like, you seeing this about gold, really? You're messing with me. Like, no,
right,
what are you talking about? So it's hard to see the world through someone else's eyes,
right.
which is actually, I'm not sure where you want to go next, but where I was going to go with the challenge. If you're curious about it, go ahead. Sorry.
Hold on. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm actually really, really curious about the challenge. I still want to talk about
Yeah,
Surfpad
no.
and
Just to talk
yeah.
about other stuff. Yes.
Oh yeah, and actually, but before that, I remember when I first talked to you, and one of the first times we were talking, you mentioned this paper. You said it was one of the scariest papers you've
Surfpad.
written,
Yes.
and so first I want to know why, and second I want to know, I want us to do a thought experiment.
Okay.
Suppose we have, we want to uh, dominate everything like the world, and we
Yes.
want
Yes.
to control everything, right? And now you have this power, and how would we do this by with the knowledge that we have from Laurel-Yanny in your studies?
Well, I'm afraid we are doing that unintentionally. What I mean by that
Wait,
is that now I'm not doing that, but people are doing that unintentionally. What I mean by
okay.
that is through social media, right? People now live in different worlds. Like, so you live in your echo chamber with your tribe, and I live in my echo chamber with my tribe, and so basically you're only exposed to information, or not only, but you're predominantly exposed to information that confirms your worldview. You know, and this is not particularly controversial that different news outlets, say, cover different topics, and if they even cover the same topic, they cover it very differently. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not controversial in 2020 that that's the case. And there's actually now apps that show you the media bias, like whichever tribe you're on, like what's the study even covered, if it was covered, who covered it, and why, and how. So I think what's going on is that this principle of SurfPad, which means that uncertainty is colored by your prior beliefs, is now happening on steroids, and you get this polarized disagreement on steroids. I mean, I don't think that's that controversial. No matter what side you're on, you see a lot of like disagreement and polarization.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
What first? Do you surf?
I'm not a surfer now.
Why did you come up with this acronym
we,
specifically?
we needed a
Surfpad.
we needed a good acronym that works, that integrates the entire perception, the whole experience,
That's
and
good.
I mean all aspects, because you need all three. You need the uncertainty, and you need to the priors, and you need than disagreement. So
So
but yeah, it was not. Go ahead.
no, so basically, surfpad is a way of saying why we disagree.
Yeah. So basically, so 10 years ago, 2011. Yeah, that's when it started. In 2011, I could convince myself that everyone kind of disagrees. Everyone kind of agrees with me, right? In 2011, you could still pretend that people kind of agree with everything that you think, right? But in
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
starting in 2012, and I'm not 100% sure what happened in 2012, there was this lift off of just like, I don't know what you want to call it, runaway polarization, runaway disagreement, where like no matter what happened, if I would check on social media or any social media, Facebook, Twitter, there would be these crazy hot takes. Now, at first, I thought people were like trolling me, and then I realized no, they really believe this. So no matter what happens, you now see people who 100% disagree about what it means and what it is, and so basically, yeah, this was an attempt to understand disagreement. Yeah, and
What can we do with that?
well, two things. So first of all, you could say, Pascal, you're full of it. Just because this applies to perception doesn't mean this applies to cognition, right? Just because you could show this to perception does not mean this applies to cognition. But I've had a kind of bad news for you, Tiago. First of all, the brain makes a much less distinction between cognition and perception than you would think. That's just a distinction that's made in like academic departments. They, decide, oh, you study cognition, you study perception, but the brain does not make that distinction. It's like a fluid, gradient. The second thing is what you can see over and over again in the brain is the brain reuses the same principles over and over and over again. Like, I mean, I can give you 1,000 examples, but in the interest of time, I won't. So I bet you that this principle surfeit applies to cognition as well. What we can do about that is two things, I think. Number one, you have to be mindful that if you disagree with somebody, that does not mean that the other person is crazy or malicious or misinformed. But that's the knee-jerk instinct, of course. So to have this dialogue that, hey, Thiago, let's say we disagree about something. We have to first recognize that if we live in a surfpad world, that's to be expected because we now have such different experiences, right? From social media and all that. And overall, I would argue that our world is balkanizing. What I mean by that is 50 years ago, everybody was kind of watching the same shows, was reading the same newspapers. That is no longer the case. And you'd be surprised. So I asked my students, class of 200 people, hey, have you read this book? Say some classic book. I don't know, Moby Dick. 2 people read it, so there's no common ground anymore, you know what I'm saying? So we are going to be living in this atomized surfpad world where we're going to disagree. So the first step is disagreement is to be expected. And it does not mean that you're wrong or crazy or a bad person. So, and then the next step is we have to trace back to your assumptions of your experience of why you believe that. And to answer your question, what you could do to take over the world, what you could do to take over the world, let's say you are a corporation or a conglomerate of corporations, and you have, say, ill-gotten gains. What I would do is I would get everyone to fight over things that don't matter, but to distract them by distracting them, but basically by exposing them to different versions of reality, and they would then their entire attention would be taken up by that, while I can keep my ill-gotten gains. That's what I would do. I'm clear. I'm not saying that out. I'm not saying that's what I would do. I'm just saying if I was a corporation that is sitting on ill-gotten gains, so I don't know, the wealth distribution has gotten really lopsided, but I want to keep that money. What I would do is I would divide the population into tribes that are fighting with each other about stuff that has nothing to do with my ill-gotten gains. That's what I would do.
Right.
And then they would argue. Then they would argue about that, and I would make out like a bandit.
Okay, that sounds good.
Right.
In terms of,
and by the way, I would buy to implement this. I would buy media organizations and tell them what to say. So I buy a newspaper, and I would have some editorial policies.
All right, that sounds like a plan. When do we start?
It's already happened.
Okay.
And I think it started around 2012.
Right. Could be.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because
Well,
again, in 2011, I didn't believe this, but now in 10 years later, we have to account.
2020, yeah,
Oh yeah,
2021.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm still stuck in 2020 for some
Yeah,
reason.
me too. Same,
It's like,
same, same. I've never updated that. But anyway, so what else we can do about that though is in terms of like intervention, right? So how can you save this, right?
will that be a challenge already?
Yes, that's a challenge.
Okay. So give us the challenge.
Here's the challenge: take something that you believe to be true, that you are 100% sure is the case. Some belief though has to not like about 2 + 2 is 4 or something like that, but some belief you have,
Right.
something you strongly believe, but that you know someone else will disagree with, or other people disagree with, but you believe it.
Mm-hmm.
But you're aware something political might be nice because you know that people disagree with it, right?
Right.
And the challenge is try to trace back why you believe what you believe. Like, is that justified by the data, or is this coming from your assumptions? You know what I'm saying? So basically, tracing your assumptions. Where do your assumptions come from? And about light and frequencies and sound, the assumptions come from your experience. But what in your life experience made you believe whatever it is that you're believing? So you said you're an immigrant. I'm an immigrant. So you might have experiences related to that. That colored your worldview.
Right.
Right. So that's my challenge to you and to your listeners and everybody else. For maybe a couple weeks, try to, instead of saying, I believe this and I know I'm right, ask yourself, what if I'm wrong about this? And why do I believe this?
Right.
Because
that's
other
hard.
people. It's hard. And by the way, it goes against all human grain. It's like I can feel your mind like bristle against this. Like, I'm not doing this. But that's the challenge. That's the challenge. Like, that's the challenge. If you want to take it seriously, try to where you are 100% convinced about something. Ask yourself, how could someone else disagree with this? Like, what assumptions could they make to disagree with what you believe? And they might be right.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense, because a lot of beliefs, a lot of narratives, as we just said earlier, are not covered by evidence. You're overconfident. 100%, you can't be 100% sure about anything. What if this is all simulation, right?
Yeah.
So you can't be sure. You're sure, but you can't be sure. So take that seriously. And the challenge is to challenge yourself. Trace your assumptions, like why is it that I believe this, whatever it is. So this is the degree of freedom. You get to pick what this is. Something that's important to you, that you believe 100%. See, but people disagree with it. Some people disagree with it.
Yeah.
Is that a fair challenge?
Oh yeah, very fair. As long as people don't go after this to social media to try to now, like, okay, now I want to go back to my tribe.
So here's the thing.
I think this would be the first thing
Yeah. So the
would
thing
think
is,
people would do.
so here's the thing. So I'm not judging this tribalism. I mean, I don't think it's sustainable, with nuclear weapons and all that, to go hardcore tribalism. But so I understand why people do it. It gives them comfort, it reinforces their worldview. But this runaway tribalism, I just don't know how sustainable it is as a civilization. You know what I'm saying? Like, at what point do you say we can't run society like that? But go ahead, sorry.
So I believe in this utopic world where post 2020 era, where let's say we all question our own reality, our own perceptions, and then understand why we believe certain things or behave in certain ways.
Yes.
And we make a new tribe of people who actually do the same thing. And in the end, the whole world is a one tribe of people trying to question themselves.
Now
and not,
that would be wonderful. I agree with you. So basically radical skepticism, or whatever. Like, I'm not sure how to call this. Like,
I don't know.
But of course, this will, in the short term, would really probably be very scarring psychologically. If you, instead of having these comforting beliefs, like if you take a lot of comfort in like belief and religion, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with that, and then you don't, that must be very emotionally challenging, and a lot of people probably, frankly, don't want to deal with that. There is a lot
Right.
of comfort in believing things with other people.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. This I mean is utopic for me, but I believe one day we'll be able to get there. Maybe like in 5 million years when we
No,
keep
I mean,
evolving.
the thing is, Tiago, it can go fast. I mean, as you probably know or experience, culture can change very fast. So in the last
Hmm.
10 years, our culture has changed dramatically. I challenge you, not a challenge. Watch some show from the 2000s, say 15 years ago, and just pay attention and ask yourself, could this be aired? Could this be aired today? And the
No,
answer,
not at
and the,
all. I
and
did
the answer,
this, yeah,
and the answer is usually no way. So
10 years
culture,
ago. Yeah.
10 years, yeah. So culture can change very fast. Actually, if there is an impetus, culture can change dramatically fast, particularly now with
Yeah.
technology. So I wouldn't
Oh
say
yeah.
it's going to take 5 million years, and I wouldn't rely on evolution for that. But cultural changes can be very swift.
Yeah. No,
So
yeah,
there's
it makes sense. Yeah.
so there's actually hope. Like if you get enough people who are committed to, like, look, I am gonna, like, anything is on the table. All my sacred cows I believe in are on the table. There are no taboos. If I assert something, I have to convince you that this is the case, not just to, like, browbeat you, but where's the evidence, right? But a lot of people are not going to be comfortable doing that. I tell you that right now. There's no way.
Hmm.
Not from
Yeah.
what I've seen, because this does presume goodwill. I have to impute that you have goodwill, that you're not trying to be malicious or take advantage or are cynical
Hmm.
and whatnot. So I'm not sure how realistic that is, but that's at least the idea that the,
Yeah.
the salvation comes from a group of people who are committed to questioning themselves and yet not get paralyzed in the doubt, in the uncertainty.
Hmm.
It's gonna be a tall
Yeah.
order.
Yeah. Let's do this. I'm
All
up
right,
for it. Cool.
great.
Well, Pascal, Dr. Wallish,
Hmm.
thank you very much for being here. It was a pleasure to discuss these things. Actually, I would love to be talking for 1 more hour about all these
Sure.
things. Like, this is what I think about all the time.
How about this, Tiago? Let's see what kind of feedback you get from this, and then we do it again. And we do it again one
Oh,
day.
yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, I mean, everything I told you today, I do believe. So what I mean by that is, it's not like, hey, thanks for coming to my TED talk. I do believe that these are, like, central issues of our time. How do we how
Oh,
do
yeah.
we manage polarization? Because we're now living in a very, balkanized world where, I mean, it's true. Like, so again, 40 years ago, even there was like I'm from Germany, right? There's like 3 channels on television, 3,
Yeah.
and they were
Yeah.
not in broadcasting every day. Sorry, all day. So you had a window of a couple hours, and everyone was watching the same show. So there
Yeah.
was common ground, right? But today, like, your experience is just gonna be you,
Yeah. So
and
2020 made things even worse because even though we had, let's say,
you're right.
2,000 sources of
You're right.
news and things like that, people were not watching that. Now at home, the whole year, like people
No, you're
are
right.
just choosing, picking whatever they want. Yeah.
So it's this, like, self-selection that creates these echo chambers,
Yeah.
and we're drifting farther and further apart. Last thing I want to say, then let it go. So I just found one way to put this in one sentence. There's this experience cascade. Briefly, prior experience colors current experience, determines future experience.
Hmm.
So it's experience. It's kind of like a chain reaction. It's kind of like a chain reaction. So, but
Right.
if you seed this process of 2 different experiences, you can get them to drift away, and that's what we're seeing now. It's
Yeah.
kind of like a chain reaction,
Yeah.
and
Like a butterfly effect
yeah, like a
for experiences.
runaway divergence. And there's nothing wrong with that,
Hmm.
except that I don't think you can run a society like that where nobody agrees anymore about what our core values are. It's gonna split. It's gonna split,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure if we were prepared for that. So that's not
Yeah.
sustainable. You cannot run a runaway polarization engine for profit and not expecting it to fall apart. It's
Yeah.
too centrifugal. And so what we're doing right now, last sentence, what's really shocking to me is, we talk about the confirmation bias.
Yeah.
So we show these Crocs and socks to people, and how do I say this? But it's so crazy. So let's say the Crocs are actually pink. but they look
Uh-huh.
gray.
Yeah.
And no matter what you see, people will be vindicated that they were right. So the people who saw it as gray will think that, oh, I was right about this. They are gray, even if they're pink. And the people who saw them as pink will be like, yeah, of course they're pink, even though they were objectively looking gray. So do you see how nefarious this is?
Yeah.
So basically, you were disconfirmed, but you don't realize that. So you think you were right all along, which is, by the way, so I said earlier that the confirmation bias is not a bias, but there is one nefarious aspect to it, which is that it's hard to learn from your mistakes if you didn't think you made any. How are you gonna improve if you think you were right all along? If you think you're right about everything and everyone else is just wrong, how are you gonna improve?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
That's how we improve, right? By making
right,
mistakes and
of
correcting
course.
them. If
And
there's
so
nothing to correct, like
and so we have lost that culture of it's okay to be wrong. You just have to commit yourself to get better. We've lost as a society. There's a lot of taboos, a lot of things. If you make a mistake, we will not give you a chance to redeem yourself. So that's very sad. It's very sad.
it is.
So in a more enlightened society, you would celebrate that. You made a mistake, but now you can learn. So I would say we need to create a culture of like epistemic humility. Like it's okay to be wrong about things. It's okay. We're all trying to figure it out. How realistic that is to implement that, I don't know. But I think it's necessary.
Yeah, I agree. I think about that every single day. Yeah, how can we just do whatever the plan you were having for conquering the world and then doing everything, like, but in the other opposite way.
Right. To fix that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, let listeners think about it and maybe leave us some feedback and see if we can come up with one agreement on how to fix things.
Sounds good.
Cool. Thank you again. Thank you very much for being here. It was a pleasure, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Wonderful.